Hey folks, Mike Johnson here. If it's got wheels and an engine, you're in the right place. On this channel, we dive into car repairs, maintenance tips, and everything you need to keep your ride running smooth. If you're into cars and want to keep learning, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. All right, enough talking. Let's get into it.
Is your vehicle triggering a P0138 fault code on your OBDI scanner? If so, read on to find out what this code means, what the symptoms and possible causes are, and how you can diagnose and solve the problem. What does the P0138 fault code mean? Fault code P0138 refers to high voltage on the O2 sensor circuit, bank 1, sensor 2. The code is set when your car's main computer, also known as the powertrain control module, PCM, detects that, for a given period of time, the voltage signal from the rear O2 sensor is too high. Honda describes the P0138 in this way: the secondary heated oxygen sensor, HO2S, sensor 2, detects the oxygen content in the exhaust gases downstream of the three-way catalytic converter, TWC, during stoichiometric air-to-fuel ratio control based on the air-to-fuel ratio. 8F, sensor output voltage, sensor 1. The secondary HO2S controls the air-to-fuel ratio from the 8F sensor output voltage to optimize TWC efficiency. Once current is applied to the secondary HO2S heater, if the secondary HO2S output continues to exceed the upper limit used during feedback control, a malfunction is detected and a DDC is recorded. For a detailed technical discussion of how the downstream oxygen sensor can trigger P0138, read the following section. For possible causes of this code, click here. How the downstream oxygen sensor can trigger P0138. All modern cars have at least two oxygen sensors. Although both sensors detect the amount of oxygen in the exhaust stream, the PCM uses the data they provide differently. The first sensor, or sensor 1, is the upstream oxygen sensor. This sensor is the main feedback input into the closed-loop fuel system and helps the PCM regulate the vehicle's air-to-fuel ratio. Okay, let's talk a little more about sensor 2, also known as the downstream oxygen sensor. The main task of this sensor is to monitor the oxygen storage capacity of the catalytic converter. What many mechanics don't know is that, on most vehicles, if the signal from the upstream, primary, O2 sensor becomes so unreliable that the ECM to PCM knows it can no longer trust this signal, the downstream O2 sensor that typically monitors oxygen storage capacity in the catalytic converter will become the ECM to PCM's primary input for fuel trim adjustments. Why? Because the algorithms written into the ECM to PCM give priority to protecting the catalytic converter, which is the most expensive and important emissions component in the system. A traditional upstream zirconia oxygen sensor produces a voltage signal that continuously swings back and forth. The reading gives the PCM an idea of the engine's air-to-fuel mixture. A value above 0.45 volts indicates a rich condition, while a reading below 0.45 volts indicates a lean condition. The upstream sensor must switch very actively while the system is in closed loop, meaning that it is constantly using the upstream sensor for fuel control. Meanwhile, if the catalytic converter and upstream sensor are working properly, the downstream oxygen sensor should drift just above 0.5 volts in a lazy fashion. It should never reflect the operation of the upstream sensor if the catalytic converter is storing oxygen correctly. Code P0138 is set when the downstream sensor sends too high a voltage signal for an extended period. Too high usually means over 1.1 volts, which is very high for a traditional zirconia-style sensor. The first part of the code indicates that the problem is on the side of the motor housing the number 1 cylinder, only applies to motors with a V or boxer configuration. If you're working on an engine with 2 banks and 4 sensors, make sure you know which is bank 1 and which is bank 2 on the vehicle you're working on, so you know you're working on the right O2 sensor. Bank 1 is where spark plug No. 1 is located. Always. Again, figure out which bank is first or you'll waste a lot of time and effort. O2 1-1 is the upstream sensor on bank 1, different for a Ford than for a Chevy or Dodge, and O2 1/2 is the downstream sensor on bank 1. O2 2-1 is upstream on bank 2 and O2 2/2 is downstream on bank 2. Since the code is for sensor 2, we know we're dealing with the downstream oxygen sensor. What are the possible causes of code P0138? Although code P0138 often appears due to a worn oxygen sensor, this is not the only condition that can trigger this error. This diagnostic code can also appear when one of the associated components fails. That's why, in addition to knowing the symptoms to watch out for, it's also a good idea to know what causes a P0138 error code. Below is a list of common causes: a defective oxygen sensor, a rich operating condition caused by a fuel delivery problem, e.g., excessive fuel pressure, damaged wiring or connections, a problem with the PCM, such as software requiring updating. What are the common symptoms of code P0138? Engine misfire and excessive fuel consumption are two common symptoms of P0138. Check engine light misfiring, engine excessive fuel consumption, hard idling, lack of acceleration, stalling. If your vehicle shows any of the above signs, have it properly diagnosed by a certified mechanic. How to diagnose code P0138? Getting the right diagnosis for any error code is extremely difficult. However, we live in the information age, so troubleshooting guides and materials for error code P0138 are readily available. How to repair code P00138? There are individual solutions for each root cause of certain fault codes. There's no single way to correct or address a specific error code. The same applies to a P0138. Vehicles can also be very different from one another. There may be different ways of addressing a particular fault code, depending on the year, make and model of your vehicle. So always check your owner's manual before attempting any repairs. Repair manuals, such as those from Chilton, are useful. However, you may want to purchase an all-data subscription if you're serious about DIY auto repair. They have single vehicle subscriptions for do-it-yourselfers that provide detailed factory repair information. In conclusion, fault code P0138 indicates a high signal from Lambda sensor 2, line 1, which can lead to poor engine performance and increased emissions. It's essential to diagnose the underlying issues, whether they stem from a faulty sensor, wiring problems, or exhaust leaks. Addressing this fault promptly can help maintain your vehicle's efficiency and longevity. If you're experiencing symptoms related to this code, consider consulting a professional mechanic for a thorough inspection and resolution. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more automotive insights.